pose a question. What kind of like it says that Charlotte and Emily experienced psychological difficulties. What kind of psychological difficulties and how are they portrayed through their writing?
We definitely see anxiety. This is, I think, I would like to say they do experience anxiety, but before I touch on that, I think they experience anger at society. I think you can see textual evidence of that, especially Charlotte creates the character of Jane Eyre and also creates Jane's id, who is Bertha, and Bertha, she lets out all of the suppressed anger that I bet Charlotte is experiencing. So some of those psychological difficulties is probably a lot of psychological anger and at society. I agree. I'll have a question. So what facts about the Brontes, like in real life, show their authorial anxiety?
Well, the fact that they release all of their works under a pseudonym, I think that shows a lot of anxiety, like literally trying to cover and like who they are because they were women.
There was a very blatant and aggressive disinterest in getting her novels published. And in Emily Bronte's case, she was her poems especially, there were lots of situations where Charlotte tried to convince Emily to get her poems published because she thought they were fantastic, but she was very protective. She didn't want people believing her own her sister.
So why did they have this anxiety?
Go ahead.
Well, I think that they had this anxiety because they were women in a society, and you were part of a time where you really couldn't do much as a woman compared to them. Like a couple of minutes ago, me and my colleague had a conversation of how women were not, how she was born during those times that she really was like written in the history books like a woman who couldn't do anything. So I feel like the reason why this anxiety comes from is because of what time period that they're in, and especially on page 353, I believe, on the last paragraph here, there is a block quote that's pretty much has a lot of emphasis, has a lot of punctuation that shows her anger, and it talks about how she's poor and plain and how she's not equal to a man, but God says that we are equal, and that's where I believe, I think I said it right, but that's where her anxiety comes from, and I think this is some of the ways that she's expressing it throughout the novel.
And from this reading, I took that that anxiety was passed down from women to women. They, from their predecessors, they found anxiety from those, like supporting women gave them anxiety because the cause for women writers now has a target on it. The patriarchy will bring it down if you support it. Other women support women, then even though it's important to support women, they have anxiety about supporting women because then they will become a target for the patriarchy and seen as lesser than because all of these women are supporting this cause.
And at the same time,
Oh, no, I was just
at the same time, I believe it's the fact that it's extremely hard for them to overcome the patriarchy, because as Ella said, they have to overcome their predecessors, and it's hard for them to do that because they will be overlooked by the male predecessors.
It's a paradox.
Yeah, and it continues to happen no matter what they do.
Like
they still have to look to somebody for encouragement and help. Hey, this guy did this. If I do this, it's going to do that. And so it's something that's continuously happening no matter what they're doing. And it's causing self-appreciation.
Right.
And it's just hitting themselves like blow after blow after blow.
Yeah, so they're kind of faced with a choice. Like Tyra was telling me earlier when we were discussing the piece that women were expected to either you had to accept it and be like, yeah, I'm just a dumb woman, but here you go, or be like, this is awesome. But I think a lot of anxiety comes from that as well.
And only a percentage of those women actually wrote, and if they did write, they may have used a fake name. And a lot of those women suppressed their feelings in their actual writing. And I think Charlotte when she created Jane, she suppressed suppressed a lot of her feelings in the beginning, well, like 75% of the time. So I think that that's another psychological effect that was illustrated in the authors and also in the characters as a result.
So going on with what Ty said, how do you think male characters are portrayed in their works? Like, I know for a fact for Emily Bront, when she wrote Jane Eyre, the way that Rochester was displayed, he was this guy was like, oh, okay, he was great, he was charming, but he had underlying problems that if you didn't really pay attention to, you will overlook.
I think both of them wrote men who like Rochester and Heathcliff were both they wanted the control. They're both very controlling men, but they also both wrote very independent women who sort of separated themselves from these men.
Right.
So I think it's very interesting that you pointed out their male characters also support the image of females like overcoming the patriarchy.
I think that's another thing. Another way we can see their anger, like you were talking about earlier, like at society, through their male characters. Because both in Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre, both of the male characters are very like considered like scraggly and just like you say controlling. And I think that's another way we see their
And
anger with society because and manipulative.
They're
because they
both
straight up-
Byronic heroes, and I
Yeah.
think it's to point out their imperfections. Like they had imperfect
Right.
male.
Yeah,
leads.
both of them are very in their character descriptions. Like whenever whenever they wrote about like who they are and their just their physical appearance, they both talk about them being like scraggly and kind of like dark. And I think that gives them a very like animalistic feature, which I think is also important to take into account. You know, it's another way we see the anger. They're portrayed as like these animals and these like people keeping them down.
Yeah, so I think like even in their real life, it was basically a mirror of like what was happening. So they felt like they were retaliating against the men, but then it's like we're doing it against ourselves too because we really don't want to be like this, but we kind of have to.
So it takes the pressure off of them and places it on like the male. I get what you're saying.
To sort of leave this part off, there are obviously a lot of the characters in both novels reflect some mental illnesses, the pains that the authors went through. Some examples are obviously Bertha would probably be the most obvious, Bertha from Jane Eyre. It's more obvious in Jane Eyre, I think. Like Rochester, at some point in his disability, he lost his eyesight as he got older. He gained it as he got older, though. I was wondering, why did she choose characters in these roles, perhaps? Why did she choose characters in these roles, such as the husband or the wife of, the scared wife of a Byronic hero, and the Byronic hero? Why did she use these characters? Why did she choose these roles to portray their roles?
Okay, pause for a second because y'all are done. I'm gonna ask a quick follow-up question to kind of go off of what they're doing and to give you something else to think about for the next round before we do the feedback. If so, everybody kind of collectively agrees that Jane Eyre is Charlotte Bronte's fictional double. If we had to think about who Emily Bronte's fictional double would be, who would it be? So think about that for next round, because we're talking about how this authorial anxiety and the psychological problems manifest in the books. Who would we see as being reflective of Emily? So now you're going to have 3 minutes to talk about the discussion that you had and what your partner did within the discussion. Remember, you have to do two glows, so two positive things, one grow, one thing they could have done better. Try to be nice to each other, please.
So I always want to say something, but I don't. So now that I'm actually saying this, but no. Yeah, these are people. But I guess it's just like, so we have, obviously,
talk about, okay, we can continue how the effects were reflected in the book, but you have to do the other book with him. I don't know.
Why did you say that though? I'm saying you heard. Then say your thoughts.
I'm gonna talk about that.
But I think
She was very.
I know, but most of the main character.
You can ask one, like, pretty much answer.
Okay, you have about 30 seconds to finish up.
I think Nelly was
Teamwork.
Okay, go ahead and switch. So outer circle, come to the inner circle. Inner circle, go to the outer circle.
Can I watch the camera? I can watch it still, but I'd like to.
Yeah.
Oh, also, I was wrong. I'm not trying to get in front of your camera.
Yeah.
So, that records an hour and a half.
Okay.
I read not enough digits.
Okay. Okay, so everybody in the middle, it's going to be the same kind of situation. But like I said, keep the question that I ask in mind because I think it'll help direct you a little bit. So you are going to have 8 minutes, just like the last group. So you can go ahead and some poor elected representative can start.
Okay, so we were talking about who was Emily Bronte's double, and the characters that I thought were one of the Cathys that's represented her just through their personalities and the way they interact with the other characters. I personally think that it was the younger Cathy because she was very closed off and kind of independent, a lot like Emily. From what I saw in the movie, like I don't know Bronte's actually what she was like, but the portrayal of her seemed like she knew she could do this on her own, and also she was just like was very like turned a cold shoulder to a lot of people. So yeah, Cathy number 2.
I don't really know. I really haven't thought of who her fictional double character would be. But I know during watching the movie, I could tell that Emily was like this character who, she didn't want Emily to write it down that she wrote poems like when her sister went around, so she got mad. So I guess she was one of the people that would like hide their feelings and emotions. And one of the passages that I had to read was about Bradstreet and how like certain authors wrote about these things, but they kind of were like apologizing for writing about what they wrote about. And then for the Bronte sisters, they were kind of like, we're gonna write about what we want to write about, and we don't care what you want to see. And it's like on page 65.
Kind of following up with what Kim just said, and it's kind of related to that. I wanted to ask this question. So I asked the question about the fictional double. What I'm going to follow up with is, does her fictional double necessarily have to be female?
No.
Think about that. If you think about the portrayal we saw of Emily, and then plus who they have, think about like who we have in the novel. What do you think?
I don't remember his name, but it was, if anything, based on how the Brontes portrayed all their stories, it was to keep his son that he would always torment and basically like never give him an education because it was out of spite, basically because of what happened to him as a kid. So like, Harrington, yes, and based on how the Brontes portrayed everything in the novels and how everything is centered around the like discrimination and like the how everyone back then for female writers, I think Harrington would be a good double for Emily because of how much he put him back. So something that M's statement reminded me was when Charlotte and Anne, the other sister, when they finally went to the publishers and they told their father and they were like, hey, we actually write these books, it's not a guy. These publishers and their father actually had a pretty positive reaction to that. I personally felt that they were kind of, I guess they were going to get scolded, but it was, like I said, it was a very positive reaction, which wasn't expected by me and some other people who I talked to. So what, I guess my question is, do you think this kind of anxiety is just like in everybody's heads? I mean, I didn't write that well, but.
I wouldn't think it's in everybody's head because there's a bunch of textual evidence. There's not a bunch, but there is some like in the Women in the Attic. There's a lot of excerpts of like priests or like the Pope and stuff like that, like people who are respected, and they talk about women writers, and they're like, to sum it up, it's like if women didn't try to write, they wouldn't be so crazy. Like they call a lot of women writers neurotic, which is just another way to say you have neurological issues. So lots of people did think that if a woman wrote, she was just going off the deep end and being too emotional and stuff like that.
I agree with Ty, and I think that actually gives these writers purpose for the setting and time period they choose in which they do write. Just to say, like, hey, these are the problems that we do suffer from in society, and they're beyond their time, so to say.
So, the part that I read, it talked about that how society gives them anxiety on purpose, and then like the women used to wear tight laces and drink vinegar so that they can be like skinny and feeble, because that's how the society thought that women was pretty. So, it's like going off at what influence, like what you think influenced them to writing in the first place.
You mean like before they had been faced with like their life? Like as a whole.
So, like, what was their natural push to write?
Yeah.
Yeah, is there, like you said, there's this idea that women writers aren't, women aren't supposed to be writing, and there's like this perfect image of like women, so they get this stuff was like out of the norm.
So they want to show that they're capable of doing like new things.
I think that kind of ties in with what Anthony said. They're ahead of their times, and they're realizing all these flaws in society, and they're trying to point it out. And I guess kind of a follow-up question is, how are they going to get people to listen? Like, even if it's in their novels, what do they do to get people to actually listen to them when they're making these statements? And they're like, hey, women can do cool things too. Like, we don't have to be this.
I think one way they showed it was through, like, when they wrote their like the author names as males or whatever. It made people like more interested in reading, because if it was women, they would like disregard it. Yeah, they wouldn't bother reading it. So when they make the male characters like controlling, and they make the female characters independent. So it shows them like sighted women can be independent through the books.
So you're saying that them writing under male names helped them get to, like, the people to understand that this idea that women have to be perfect is not.
Yeah, and them showing like the female characters, like the main ones, as independent also.
I also think it helped them to deal with the anxieties a little better, because from what I read on page 65, it says, for all these women, the cloak of maleness was obviously a practical seeming refuge from those claustrophobic double binds of femininity, which had given so much pain to writers like Bradstreet, Finch, and Catfish. So I think that helped them be able to express how they felt towards the anxieties of society, and that is why they probably portrayed it in the books the way they did with the structure.
So one question that I have, and we'll finish our discussion on this note. What does it feel like to not see yourself represented effectively in popular culture? Like, we can talk about this in a very modern way of looking at things. So, like, if you think about what it feels like to see every version of you look like a negative stereotype because somebody else is telling your story. What can you do with that? And that's just kind of like a general question for everybody because we were right at the end of what we were doing. Yeah, Ella.